from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and how are you doing today? I hope you're doing very well. So we are still in July 2019, so this is still the time that Barnes & Noble is having its Criterion sale, where most of the items I understand of the Criterion collection are being sold 50% off. So it's a big deal. So hopefully you have been enjoying the sale. You have been getting the things that you wanted to get, and you still have time, of course, so hopefully you're enjoying it. And I know a lot of people have been sharing their gets and what they plan to get, and thank you so much for sharing this, my friends. I really appreciate it. It's so much fun for me to read. And so please keep them coming. Please keep those comments coming. Let me know what it is you get going forward. So really lovely stuff. So part of the thing that I wanted to do this month is just share with you some aspects of the Criterion collection that maybe you might be interested in. Because the Criterion collection is very vast. There are so many different pockets of cinema that are being represented in the Criterion collection. Actually, too many pockets for me to be able to cover all of them throughout a series of videos. So I can only pick a very, very select few. And what I pick is just a small minority of the vast expanse of the Criterion collection. So pardon me for my own narrow-mindedness in it, as it were, in terms of how I select these things. But my next selection in what I think might be of interest to you in terms of the Criterion collection is a number of films that are directed by a very interesting filmmaker. And the filmmaker that I'm talking about made films such as The Brood and Scanners and Videodrome and Naked Lunch, among others. The filmmaker's name is David Cronenberg, a very interesting filmmaker with a unique voice. His films can sometimes be, or oftentimes be, quite intense, sometimes very graphic. They sometimes deal with themes that are complicated, that deal with certain aspects of human nature that might not necessarily be comfortable to watch or consider. Nevertheless, Cronenberg handles these themes with a lovely sensitivity, a deep kind of intelligence, and also a warmth towards his characters and sensitivity towards the characters that he is having run around, as it were, in the world that he has painted and has developed. There are a number of films that he has made throughout his very long career, but only a few have appeared in the Criterion collection. So not all of his films are in the Criterion collection, unfortunately, but a number of them are. So let's start with 1979. This is spine, let's see. Yes, so 1979. This is spine number 777. This is The Brood. Now, this is a kind of a horror film, but it's a horror film that deals with separation and the trauma of separation and the intensity and almost the negative impacts that can arise, the consequences thereof that can arise as a result of separation and the trauma therefrom. This is also a very deeply disturbing and scary film with some images that will really haunt. Some things that happen here are quite gross and a little bit too much sometimes. Still, I find this work to be a film that I think in many respects elevates itself beyond its seemingly genre horror roots, as it were, and it becomes a film that has the potential for being very much a profoundly disturbing work, again, about the consequences of separation. So this is The Brood, and this shows, I think, Cronenberg as a kind of genre filmmaker on the one hand, but he has his genre sensibilities fused with kind of almost his antenna, as it were, is fixed on the core emotional crux of the matter, namely this idea of relationships between men and women, between parents and children, and the kind of negative implications in terms of not necessarily union per se, but separation, and the idea of how that leads to certain consequences such as negativity, anger, and confusion and misunderstanding, but it all creates this almost potential for chaos, and thus horror erupts. So it's this interesting cycle between horror genre elements on the one hand and somewhat profound elements about human nature on the other. So this is The Brood from 1979 for your consideration. Next is from 1981, spine number 712. This is Scanners. So Scanners is this sci-fi horror action film. It's not a high-budget action film. It's a fairly low-budget affair. And so it might seem to be a little bit underwhelming in some places, but not all places, because where it might seem to be somewhat underwhelming in some places, it more than makes up for it in other places. My goodness, there are some moments here that are just explode beyond the confines of this otherwise B film, and just creates these iconic images of horror and disgust, and just a really sort of bloody horror show. But they are all moments that have a certain impact and meaning, because there's this idea going on here about identity and about sort of control, and about technology, and the encroachments of technology on human consciousness, on the human psyche, and the positive effects that has, but also the negative effects that has. And this is all enmeshed in this great plot about corporate takeover, about sort of medical intrigue, about spies, and about scanners, right? And this idea of telepathic warriors that are battling against each other with their minds, and they have the power to control people, and they also have the power to inflict physical damage on people in very extreme ways. So this is the film Scanners. So this is, I think, a very memorable action sci-fi horror film from David Cronenberg. Again, very interesting work. Scanners from 1981 for your consideration. It's certainly not for everyone. It's very violent in some places, very intense. So if you don't like that sort of thing, stay away from this film. But for the rest of you, for your consideration. Next is from 1983. So this is spine number 248. Videodrome. So let me just show you the spine there, which is really brilliant. How to explain Videodrome to someone who's never seen it? It's a bizarre visual horror suspense masterpiece. This film is certainly not for everyone. This film will certainly shock. It will, I think, make people very frustrated. It will anger some people, I'm sure. And it will also disgust a lot of people. But there are so many things going on here. This idea of compulsiveness, of obsession, this idea of technology, again, encroaching on the system, and the system here being the human nervous system, and this idea of illness manifest into physical flesh, this idea of sickness into flesh, and this idea of the emotional manifesting into the physical. And this is really great because this is, I think, the hallmark of human expression, right? This idea of things that we feel manifesting into actions and things that are made physical, right? So that's the essence of human communication. So in a way, this is a film that is at its heart about communication. And indeed, we have the film with story elements that deal with communication, right? Television signals, TV stations, messages that are sent through radio waves, TV waves, and the like. And so at its heart, I think it's about communication, right? But not just electrical communication, but it's also this idea of human communication, albeit a very extreme mode of that kind of communication. And also, here we have illusions and fantasies and nightmares manifest into this very interesting visual cinematic grammar that Cronenberg employs. What we see is not necessarily what is real, or is it? We're not quite sure. So it becomes a great, confusing, lovely mess that is just an artistic, I think, feat, accomplishment, a very gross film in many ways, and it's a film that just punctures and disturbs and provokes and ultimately creates a deeply disturbing yet strangely satisfying experience that, again, has to be seen to be believed. It's very intense. It's not for everyone, that is for sure. But if you can handle it, for your consideration, Videodrome, spine number 248. And see you in Pittsburgh. Then there's spine 220 from 1991, Naked Lunch. This is a remarkable film in terms of its out there visual imagery, in terms of its chaotic nature, in terms of the way in which illusion and nightmares and dreams are just spliced into reality of film in a way that is almost just imperceptible. It is perceptible in the sense that we're dealing with these weird worlds that are being created, but it is also imperceptible in the fact that reality and illusion have a very thin boundary between them. It's almost to the point where it's too thin, paper thin, wafer thin, if you will. And it becomes really a film that is, in essence, about a man and his struggles with drug use and his struggles with his certain sort of emotional issues that I think involve certain people around him, in particular the relationship between himself and his wife. So this is at the heart of this film. This is at the heart of this film. Again, that's the brilliant thing about Cronenberg. And he has all these weird visual elements at play, but there's always at their core, the core crux of these films is always some kind of human element. The effects of external stimuli on the human psyche, the idea of human relationships and how they play out in terms of a visual metaphor that explodes exponentially. But always at the heart of the film is the human element. And so that is on display with a kind of force and ferocity and drive that makes the ultimate viewing experience of Naked Lunch, while it's a bizarre, weird, odd thing, ultimately the viewing experience is emotionally deep and quite shattering. So it's a very, very unique work of art that, again, will disgust, will maybe anger some people, will confuse people, but it will also have the potential, I think, of moving people and also of giving people a real, fully formed emotional experience. So again, it's not for everyone, but if you're okay with this kind of intense work, Naked Lunch, spine number 220 for your consideration. So I should also mention that there are other films by David Cronenberg that appear as well. So first of all, let me mention that the Blu-ray, or the release of Scanners, includes the film Stereo, and The Brood includes the film Crimes of the Future. So these are two early works by David Cronenberg that are included not as individual releases, but as separate, or as supplements to these two releases, respectively. So Stereo and Crimes of the Future. Incidentally, Crimes of the Future was also available as a release supplement to this Laserdisc Dead Ringers. Speaking of Dead Ringers, we have also the out-of-print DVD of Dead Ringers. So this is unfortunately out of print, but it's a really great work by Cronenberg, and also it's a film that you can find released on other labels. So, but Dead Ringers, hopefully it will come back to the Criterion Collection one day. Who knows? Fingers crossed. But then we have, among the many features on Videodrome, the work Camera from 2000, short film by Cronenberg, which is included on Videodrome, the release here. And let's see, what else? What else can we say? Yes, I think we can also mention that it's a Laserdisc, but Criterion, once upon a time, released Crash on Laserdisc, which is right here. This happens to be spine number 349 in the Laserdisc catalog. A very, very interesting film, Crash. Very intense, quite graphic in some places, in many places, I should say. There are, the tone of the film is quite cold, but it has a kind of meaning and purpose that is undeniable. So this is David Cronenberg's Crash on Laserdisc. It hasn't been released in a Criterion DVD or Blu-ray, but who knows, fingers crossed that it might happen soon. Who knows, but let's hope it does. So that is, in essence, what the Criterion Collection has as far as David Cronenberg's work. As you can see, the representation of Cronenberg in the Criterion Collection is not necessarily full and extensive, in that it doesn't have a lot of his later works. In fact, the latest work that it has is Naked Lunch, and also the short work Camera from 2000. But other than that, there isn't anything of his later output. So maybe this is a kind of a limited representation of Cronenberg in the Criterion Collection. However, I would suggest that this representation is really like a golden age of Cronenberg's output. I'm a big fan of Cronenberg's work, and I'm actually a great admirer of his later works and his most recent works. But I do admit that his earlier works, many of which are represented here, to me, represent, in many respects, a kind of summit in this kind of cinema, and this really provides a lot of ideas that are presented in bizarre, unique ways. So I think this period of Cronenberg's career is really fascinating. So I'm very happy that the Criterion Collection has represented it the way it has. Of course, it would be great to see other films by Cronenberg, even from this period. I don't know, Shivers or Rabid, or even The Dead Zone, The Fly. Other works, of course. Fast Company, that would be an interesting release to see. But and other films, of course, but Existence even. But in any event, I actually saw Existence in the theater, and that's one film that I really didn't like when I first saw it, but it grew on me to the point where I think it's actually quite brilliant in many places. So it would be great to see Existence in the Criterion Collection one day, but who knows, as well as other films. But be that as it may, of course, we still have what is currently available in the Criterion Collection, and it is brilliant. Again, it's not for everyone, so please be wary, please be careful. Just make sure that you kind of know what you're getting into. If you're getting a Cronenberg film. And if you're not into that kind of cinema, you don't have to watch this stuff, so don't worry. It is a little bit intense, it can be a little bit icky, so just be careful. But if you're okay with that kind of stuff, that kind of cinema, then, and if you haven't seen a Cronenberg film yet, highly recommend it. So anyway, for your consideration, my friends. Okay, my friends, that's it for now. So until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. Please, please, please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So until we meet again, my friends, cheers.